The galaxy burned with the fury of war, and at its heart sat a queen whose will had shaped empires. She had ruled longer than most stars burned, and her people whispered that her blood carried eternity itself. Yet eternity meant little when enemies closed in from every horizon. Humanity had risen like wildfire, pushing her fleets back, burning her colonies, and testing her throne with every strike. Still, her pride was unbroken. She would not let a race of upstarts destroy what she had built across centuries of conquest. Her daughters, the heirs to her crown, were her greatest treasure, symbols of hope to her people, and the promise that her line would not end even if her world burned. On the day her rage turned into madness, she had been watching the battlefield through the cold glass of her warship. Her daughters had been in the palace below, guarded by soldiers sworn to their last breath. Yet in the chaos of a human raid, the alarm screamed, fires erupted across the sky, and when the smoke cleared, the guards lay dead and the heirs were gone. Panic thundered through her halls. Not even the mightiest shield could protect her from the truth. Her children had vanished.
She did not weep.
She raged. She turned her grief into fire and ordered retaliation without hesitation. Human colonies burned, their skies blackened under the rain of her fleet's wrath. Entire settlements vanished in storms of plasma, and the cries of the innocent echoed across the stars. In her eyes, there was no distinction between soldier and child, guilty and innocent. If humanity had dared to take her daughters, then humanity as a whole would pay. Her generals exchanged wary glances behind closed doors. They feared her judgment was broken, that her grief had blinded her reason, but none dared to speak aloud. To question the queen was to invite death, and so they bowed and carried her fury across every world within reach. Yet questions spread like infection among her people. If the heirs were gone, what future remained for the empire? What meaning was there in conquest if the bloodline that bound them together had been severed? Scouts combed every ruin, every battlefield, every human prison ship they could seize. The queen demanded answers. She would not accept that her daughters were gone forever. Reports came back in fragments. No trace, no bodies, no captives. Each silence fueled her wrath further, and her vengeance spread wider. She told herself that extermination was justice, that by drowning humanity in blood, she could fill the void left inside her chest. But war has a way of revealing truths no sword can silence. It came in the form of a broken scout limping back from the edge of the conflict. His armor was torn, his voice hoarse, yet his eyes shone with terror and wonder. When brought before her, he knelt low, and his words cracked the silence of her throne. He spoke of something that should not have been possible. He had seen them, the heirs,
Alive.
not in chains, not as captives, but resting as if the universe itself had chosen to protect them. Her daughters, he swore, were lying in the arms of a human soldier, a man broken and bloodied from battle, yet alive, and shielding them with his own body. He had watched them, not in fear, but in reverence, as though they were his own. And when night fell, the daughters had not cried, had not fled, but had curled against his chest, sleeping peacefully under the protection of the very enemy the queen had sworn to annihilate. The court fell silent. Some called the scout mad, delirious from wounds. Others whispered that such a sight could only be a trick, some deception meant to weaken the queen's resolve. But deep inside her, something cold shifted. If his words were true, then the foundation of her vengeance was cracked. For in all her centuries, she had never seen an enemy show mercy where hatred had been commanded. Humanity had fought her empire with unrelenting fury, but if even one of them had chosen to protect what was most precious to her, then the war she waged might not be as simple as victory and annihilation. The queen's claws tightened around the arms of her throne. Her eyes burned with the weight of impossible choices. She had sworn to wipe humanity from the stars, yet the possibility that her daughters lived, not in terror but in peace, shattered the clarity of her rage. If a human could cradle her heirs without harm, then perhaps the war was not only with her enemies, but within her own soul. And for the first time since the flames began, she felt doubt. He had not set out to be anyone's savior. He was just another soldier caught in a war that stretched across worlds, another body sent to fight battles that never seemed to end. His armor was dented, his skin burned, and his heart carried the weight of too many fallen comrades. Humanity had fought with grit and fire, always outnumbered, always underestimated, but always surviving. That was what being human meant, refusing to die quietly, no matter the odds stacked against them. He found the children in the ruins of a battlefield, smoke curling in the sky, and the soil soaked with blood. They were trembling, small shapes half buried under debris, eyes wide with fear but unbroken by tears. He recognized them instantly. The daughters of the alien queen. The heirs to the throne of the empire that had sworn to erase his kind from the stars. Every instinct screamed at him to walk away, or to raise his weapon and end the war in a single act. But when their eyes locked on his, he saw no royalty, no enemy, only the fragile innocence of children who had lost everything familiar. And so, against all logic, he lowered his weapon and offered his hand. They recoiled at first, flinching from his touch, but hunger and exhaustion softened their fear. He gave them the last of his rations, guided them to shelter, and treated their wounds with clumsy care. He had no language to bridge the divide, yet when he laid his cloak around them, they understood. They stopped trembling. They slept. And when dawn came, they had not fled. Instead, they curled against him, their tiny breaths warm against his chest, as though his heartbeat itself promised safety.
He knew what it meant.
To shield them was to invite death from both sides. His commanders would brand him a traitor for protecting the bloodline of their enemy. The queen would call for his execution for daring to touch what belonged to her. But he could not abandon them. War had taken too much, and in that moment, he refused to let it claim 2 more lives. They were not enemies. They were children. That truth was enough. Every step through the wastelands tested his resolve. Patrols swept the skies, drones scanned the ruins, soldiers hunted anything that moved. He carried them hidden under scraps of cloth, their weight small but their presence immense. When they stirred at night, frightened by the sounds of distant battles, he whispered words they could not understand but felt nonetheless. He told them they were safe. He told them no harm would reach them while he still drew breath. And somehow, they believed him. Word spread, as it always does in war. A soldier carrying alien royalty was too strange a tale to remain rumor. Some humans who crossed his path called him insane, accusing him of protecting the very heirs of the empire that had slaughtered their kin. Others looked upon him with quiet reverence, as if he carried not just children but the fragile chance for peace. He ignored both praise and condemnation. His duty was no longer to war, but to the small lives who trusted him completely. The bond grew stronger with each passing day. The daughters, once silent shadows clinging to each other, began to show signs of life again. They laughed softly when he stumbled on broken ground. They tugged at his sleeves when he tried to walk too fast. They watched him with wide eyes as though he were something more than a man, something unshakable.
He knew better.
He was no hero, no chosen protector. He was tired, bleeding, and often afraid. But their trust made him stand taller than he had ever stood before. The closer he came to safety, the more dangerous his path became. Scouts hunted him relentlessly, following whispers of alien royalty in human hands. Each night, he expected to be found, to be crushed under the weight of inevitability. Yet he pressed on, driven not by orders or glory, but by a promise he had never spoken aloud, that as long as he lived, no one would harm them. And then, as the horizon split with fire and shadows, he realized his time had run out. They had found him. Alien scouts, swift and merciless, closed in from every direction, their weapons gleaming in the dying light. He had nowhere to run, no reinforcements to call upon, no strength left for another fight. He gathered the children close, his arms tightening around them, his body the only shield he could offer. If death was to come, it would come through him first. But the daughters did not cry. They did not beg or struggle. They pressed closer against his chest, their trust absolute, their small hands gripping his armor as though he was unbreakable. And in that moment, he felt something greater than fear. He felt purpose. Whatever happened next, he had given them more than survival. He had given them proof that, even in a universe torn by hatred, humanity's strength was not cruelty, but compassion. And that was something no empire could erase. The queen had imagined this moment 1,000 times since the day her daughters vanished. In every vision, she had pictured herself striking down their captor, carving justice from his bones, and reclaiming what was hers. Hatred had been her armor, a shield against the grief that would have hollowed her to dust. But when her soldiers dragged her to the edge of the battlefield and she saw the truth with her own eyes, that armor began to crack. The human was broken, his armor shattered, blood staining the ground beneath him. Yet he stood tall despite his wounds, his body curled around the two small figures nestled against his chest. Her daughters, alive, breathing, their faces soft with the calm of dreams, their arms clinging to him as if he were the only safe place left in a galaxy consumed by fire. The sight froze her. This was not the cruelty of an enemy using hostages as bait. This was something else, something she had no word for. Her generals urged her to command their deaths. One swift order, and the human would be reduced to ash, her daughters wrenched free, and her power reaffirmed before all. It would silence whispers of weakness. It would restore her image as the unbreakable sovereign who had never faltered. But her daughters stirred, small voices breaking the silence, calling for the man they had chosen as protector. They did not shrink from him. They reached for him. And in that instant, the queen felt a fracture spread through the core of her being. She stepped forward, her eyes locked on the human. His gaze met hers, steady despite the weight of death pressing in from every direction. He did not beg for mercy, did not raise his weapon in defiance. He only tightened his arms around the children, as if to say that, even at the cost of his life, they would not be harmed. When she demanded to know why, his answer was stripped of artifice, raw and unshaken. Because they needed me. Those 4 words struck deeper than any blade. In her empire, need was weakness, compassion was folly, and mercy was a myth. Yet here stood a being who embodied all 3, and somehow he had done what her armies had failed to do. He had kept her daughters alive. No promises of loyalty, no oath of service, only the simple act of choosing to protect what was not his. Her court waited, their voices trembling with fury and fear. They demanded she kill him, to erase the insult of her heirs wrapped in human arms. They called for blood, for vengeance, for the restoration of order. The queen listened, but their words rang hollow compared to the quiet trust radiating from her children. They did not care for crowns or thrones. They cared only for the man who had given them warmth when the universe abandoned them. She saw herself reflected in their eyes, saw not the ruler, not the warrior, but the mother. And as mother, she could not ignore the truth. If she struck him down, her daughters would not understand. They would not see justice in his death, only cruelty. They would know that the one who shielded them when all else failed had been destroyed by the very hand that should have protected them most. That was a burden she could not force them to carry. Silence weighed heavy as she stood before her people. The command for execution hung on her tongue, but when the words came, they were not what anyone expected. She spared him. She gave life where death was demanded. Gasps echoed through the ranks, disbelief rippling like a storm. Some called her decision treason, others weakness, but none could deny the daughters clinging to the human as if he were family. For the first time in centuries, the queen allowed her heart to speak louder than her pride. She had seen the enemy's face, not in battle, but in sacrifice. And she realized that perhaps her war had not been against humanity at all, but against the possibility of change she had been too proud to accept. The human lowered his head, not in submission but in weary acknowledgement. He had no illusions of safety. He knew the Empire could crush him in an instant. Yet in that fragile pause, with the heirs safe and the Queen's wrath tempered, the galaxy itself seemed to hold its breath. For in sparing him, She had admitted a truth far more dangerous than any weapon, that her enemy was capable of honor. And once such a truth takes root, it cannot be silenced. The queen had long believed her crown was forged from unyielding strength, that mercy was a crack through which empires crumbled. Yet the image of her daughters clinging to the human's chest lingered, breaking down walls she thought unbreakable. Her generals raged in secret, some calling her act treason against her own blood, others fearing her hesitation would ignite rebellion. Still, she silenced them with a single look. They could not understand what she had seen, nor what it meant. She had built her reign on conquest, but conquest had never once cradled her children. It had been an enemy's compassion that had done what all her armies could not. In the quiet of her chambers, she replayed every moment. The war had consumed her people for decades, each battle draining them of resources, spirit, and hope. They had called humanity monsters, but what monster shields children not his own? She thought of the soldiers' answer, simple yet impossible, because they needed me. No vow, no calculation, no strategy, just the raw truth of a heart unwilling to abandon innocence. In that truth, she saw the hollowness of her vengeance. What legacy would her daughters inherit if all that remained was a graveyard of ashes and endless enemies? The empire stirred uneasily. Rumors spread faster than her decrees, whispers of a human who had carried the heirs through fire and blood. Some scoffed, others began to question the lies they had been fed about humanity's nature. Even within her war council, cracks appeared. A few urged renewed slaughter, but more spoke cautiously of possibility, as though daring to imagine a future beyond endless war. She realized then that her decision on a single soldier's fate had done more to reshape her empire than years of battle. The human did not ask for reward or sanctuary. He was weary, scarred, and more ready to die than to bask in victory. Yet his presence forced both sides to confront themselves. Among her people, he was proof that enemies could be protectors. Among humans, he became a tale of survival and compassion, a story that spread through trenches and colonies alike. Soldiers who had lost faith found it again, not in conquest, but in the reminder that their humanity meant something in the darkest void. The daughters remained close to him, unshaken by politics or war. Their innocence was a mirror that reflected truths no throne could deny. They laughed at his clumsy gestures, trusted his steady presence, and showed the queen what she had forgotten. That peace was not weakness, but the soil in which strength could grow. Each time she saw them resting against him, the weight of her crown felt less like armor and more like chains. She knew her decision would not end the war overnight. Too much blood had already been spilled, too many voices cried for vengeance. Yet she also knew that cycles only break when someone dares to step outside them. Her empire had feared humanity because it was resilient, adaptable, impossible to crush. Now she understood the truth. Their greatest weapon was not their machines, nor their strategies, but their hearts. Against that, no empire could truly prevail. When she stood before her court again, she did not speak of vengeance. She spoke of survival, of futures her children might inherit, of choices that did not lead to endless graves. Her generals seethed, but her daughter's presence silenced dissent. The heirs themselves had chosen a protector from among their enemies, and no argument could erase that reality. For the first time in her reign, her voice carried not just authority, but conviction born from humility. The human was offered freedom, though many expected he would not live long in a galaxy scarred by war. Yet he endured, his story carried on every ship, whispered in every trench, told in every corner where fear had once held sway. He became less a man than a symbol, an ordinary soldier who had done something extraordinary, not by wielding power, but by refusing to abandon what was vulnerable. And the queen, once the embodiment of unrelenting wrath, found herself changed by that symbol. She no longer saw humanity as shadows clawing at her empire's edges, but as a force capable of shaping destiny alongside her people. The path ahead would be long, fraught with betrayal and blood yet to be spilled, but the seed had been planted. War was no longer the only language spoken between them. As she watched her daughters laugh beside the human, their small hands tugging at his scarred armor, she realized what her crown had cost her and what it might yet preserve. The cycle of hate could end, not with conquest, but with the simple act of one soldier's compassion. That was the lesson carved into her heart, a truth stronger than fleets, stronger than thrones, stronger even than the fire of vengeance. For the first time in centuries, the queen did not see herself as eternal. She saw herself as a mother, her daughters safe in the arms of a man who had reminded her of what truly endures. And in that fragile moment of understanding, she glimpsed a future worth more than any empire, a legacy not of war, but of hope.